listener production.
Hi, Simon Beaton with you for this episode of The Briefing. When you take a gulp of bottled Mount Franklin spring water, you might imagine it comes from a pristine and abundant water source in an exotic wilderness location. But in reality, Coca-Cola has been legally pumping groundwater for free out of a bore on the outskirts of Perth in WA to sell as bottled water for the last 32 years. And now residents have had enough. They're worried about the amount of water being extracted without obvious oversight in a region that's drying out and is prone to fire. WA Water Minister Simone McGurk says their concerns are justified. She's pushing for a review of the agreement that allows the multinational beverage giant to pump water from the site. Minister McGurk joins us today to talk through both the problem and the solutions. Minister, the first shock I had was learning that Mount Franklin water doesn't come from Mount Franklin.
Yeah, that's right. I guess it is sort of a truth in advertising lesson, isn't it? Sort of look at the fine print about where this water actually comes from that we do pay a pretty price for at the checkout.
And in WA, Coca-Cola have been pumping this water from the city of Armidale for the last 32 years, since 1992, correct?
So I think most Australians would be surprised to hear that the spring water is another name, I guess, for groundwater sometimes for people, and it's sourced from various places around the country. I understand that in the case of Coca-Cola, there's another brand that they use for their water in Armidale in Western Australia, which is called Never Fail. I'm not sure if that retails around the country, but it does here in Western Australia. So it is a spring water source and does require some treatment, but very minimal treatment. So it's very good quality water that they are pumping up, putting on trucks and then taking to their bottling plant in suburban Perth.
How did this agreement come about?
Well, there's all sorts of agreements that apply throughout our state and around the country for commercial users to access both groundwater and spring water and what is also called surface water. So that will be from rivers, for instance. Rainfall is the other source of water and that goes into our dams. And in Western Australia here, and I think other states as well, like Victoria, you have desalination plants. So there's a variety of different sources of water. But in this case, for commercial use, the groundwater is sourced. There's a pump put into the ground. It's accessed through there and then taken up regularly. In the case of Coca-Cola, they did apply to the local government back in the early 90s, which would have limited how much they took and how many truck movements was associated with those movements. At the time, the local government limited how much they were going to take. And when the company appealed to the then Conservative Liberal National state government to say, we don't want those limits, the state government agreed and said, yes, we agree there shouldn't be any limits. And those planning decisions that were made back in the early 90s still apply today.
So I'm imagining, though, that they pay a lot of money for this water?
They pay no money for this water. And I think that's really rubbed salt in the wound for many West Australians in particular, who are coming off the back of a record dry and hot summer. Since records have been kept for us 150 years, this is the driest summer we've had, and record temperatures as well. We're in the middle of May as we're talking, and this week I think is expected to not go below 28 degrees each day.
Yeah, we'll get a bit more into that in a second. But first, I think it's important that we talk about how much water Coca-Cola is extracting at the moment.
Yeah, so look, that's one of the issues is that we don't have any information on that. So there are some areas in Western Australia as we manage our water resources in what are called proclaimed areas. So under my power as the State Minister for Water, we proclaim certain areas, and after proclaiming those areas, then the groundwater will have a plan for how much groundwater can be taken, and people apply then for licences, and we charge for those licences and limit how much people can take. Most of the state, if you can look at the state of Western Australia, it's a massive landmass. It's about a third of the landmass of the country. It's actually not proclaimed areas that govern the state, so that govern the water. So in fact, that's the case where Coca-Cola is taking their water. In this case, it's not a proclaimed area. So they do have to register their bore, but they don't have to pay for the licence. They don't have to monitor how much they take. So that's really the first thing that people and I am frustrated by, is that there's no public disclosure of how much they're actually taking.
So we don't have any idea at all? I mean, is it likely to be a small amount? Or if I go down to Coles right now and grab a bottle of Mount Franklin, is it quite likely that that water is coming from the city of Armidale in WA?
It's possible that it is. And as I said, it might be under a different brand. The Coca-Cola sells their bottled water under other brands, for instance, Neverfail, as I mentioned earlier. So it might be that water is coming from Armidale. But yes, that's right. We don't know exactly how much. On being approached by some of the members of the public who were concerned at the truck movements and the amount of water that Coca-Cola was taking out, I did ask to meet with Coca-Cola, and I'm happy to say that they agreed to that meeting, and we spoke early last week, and they have agreed to meet with my agency, the State Department of Water and Environmental Regulation, and talk about how much water they're taking out. And I've also asked them for information about other other sources of water for their bottled water that they have in Western Australia. So we're getting all of that information from them now. Some of that they own the land, some of it they lease those properties to get that water.
Yeah, right. Now, earlier as well, you spoke about how dry it is over in Perth and those record levels of no rain. I mean, do we need to stop this completely? Is that a possibility?
Managing our water resources, particularly now that we are starting to understand the real impacts of climate change. Obviously, we need to combat climate change, but the reality of these changing temperatures they are the so-called new normal. We can expect that. And it's not only higher temperatures and lower rainfall, but less predictable rainfall. So that's got real challenges for the industries that rely on water supplies. And we can get frustrated at a company like Coca-Cola. It's a multinational company, very profitable, selling us good quality water in our supermarkets and service stations, but at a pretty price. But I think the other industries that probably there's a bit more sympathy for are our farmers and horticulturalists, and we rely on them, right, for fresh produce. So actually, alongside where Coca-Cola is drawing water, you've got in the Swan Valley in Western Australia, in Perth, a whole lot of horticulturalists that rely very much on that water. So this is the challenge that we've got: a drying climate, less reliable rainfall, warmer temperatures, but a whole lot of industry that rely on that water, and how we manage that is part of my job as the Minister for Water. And the public discussion I think we've got to have as we move forward in these changing times.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you spoke about meeting with representatives from Coca-Cola, Amatil, and about the licensing as well. Is there also an element that if they want to keep taking this water that they could have to pay more for it?
Payment will be one of the issues that we'll have a look at, and I'm getting some advice from my agency about what the options are. One of the challenges with that, though, is that if we declare the area that Coca-Cola is taking water from, and that would then allow us to have a water allocation plan, and then we license and allocate the water accordingly so people pay for their water and limit how much they take, is that would apply to everyone in the area. So that'll apply to the horticulturalists across the road who are already doing it pretty tough. So that's the challenge that we've got. As a minimum, I think there is an expectation of public expectation, and I certainly have an expectation that Coca-Cola and other commercial users like them will publicly disclose how much they're taking, and that we have a lot more cooperation with the government agencies like my agencies who employ scientists to really understand what's happening with the water supplies under the ground. In this case, we think it's fractured water. So you've got a range of different sort of rock formations underneath, which also go to the quality of the water. That's why they talk about spring water, and it sort of is a filtering process which gives you very good quality water. It's likely that water may not affect neighbours as much as other groundwater sources will, but that's the sort of scientific advice we need to get. And we want Coca-Cola to cooperate with the agency and the scientists working within that agency so that we can better understand the impacts. But as I said, as a minimum, I would expect Coca-Cola and other companies like them to cooperate with our agency on what they're taking out, because they'll know how much they're taking out. They put the water in trucks and they move it off, to disclose that, and any other scientific information they have in-house with our agency. And I'm hopeful we can make that public as well.
So it sounds as well like this is actually quite a broad issue with the transparency, and that Coca-Cola is not the only company that are doing this though. Yes,
exactly. So I'm asking advice about that as well from my government department about what are the other companies within both declared areas. So they will have licenses and be required under law to monitor how much they take, and there'll be limits on it. And others that are in undeclared areas, which all they need to do is sort of register their board. But apart from that, there's no limitations on or price on what they take. So we're getting an idea of that.
And one final question for you. Sounds like there is a lot going on in this space. You're having a lot of meetings with Coca-Cola. You're listening to the people trying to create change. Are we expecting any change in the short term, or will this take a while for changes to come into effect with Coca-Cola?
That's a really good question. In the short term, I'm really hoping that we'll get some public information about how much Coca-Cola and other companies like them, if I can get that, are taking from the groundwater and how many truck movements that represents, so we can release that information. And then maybe I'm also hoping in the medium term to put that in a format that's publicly accessible for people, so on a website, or whether that's a government website or whether that's through Coca-Cola or their industry body. In the longer term, though, I think this is a public discussion. Any time we try and limit people's water, it causes a lot of angst, because we're used to having access to, every time we turn on the tap. Farmers, for instance, they invest a lot in their businesses. They rely on that water. So we actually do have to be careful about how much we use this water, and increasing our water literacy is a really important part of what we're very conscious of as a state government.
Minister McGurk, thank you so much for coming on the briefing.
Great to talk to you.
Thanks for listening to today's briefing. That's all we've got right now. But before you go, we'd love if you could share this ep with someone you think might enjoy it. If you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast, and on TikTok and YouTube, search Listener Newsroom. I'm Simon Beaton. See you soon.